The 1920s came to define America as a land of economic prosperity, luxury, and social excess. However, the stock market crash of 1929 quickly ended the decade known as the Roaring Twenties and signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. The Great Depression of the 1930s brought devastating economic instability and social unrest. As unemployment rose and many Americans struggled to feed their families, a panic set in among working-class Americans to find quick solutions to the crisis. With the high numbers of Mexican migrant workers in the country at the time, all Mexicans, both undocumented and natural-born citizens, became targets for angry Anglo-Americans to blame for the economic downturn. As an anti-Mexican hysteria began, Mexicans were blamed for stealing jobs and abusing the nation's resources through welfare and government aid. Even though the claims against Mexicans were unfounded, they became scapegoats for the country's problems during the Great Depression. Ultimately, many Mexicans faced discrimination from society, the government, and local law enforcement. They were threatened with deportation, and a campaign of fear began that coerced many to return to Mexico. The mass exodus of Mexicans returning to Mexico, along with their families and belongings, came to be called the Mexican Repatriation movement. Repatriation is defined as the process of returning a person voluntarily to his or her place of origin or citizenship. But let me tell you, no one bothered to look at that definition of repatriation because the Mexican repatriation movement of the 1930s was anything but. Although some packed up their things and left for Mexico on their own, many could not afford the price of travel to do so. As Mexican government became aware of the plight of their compatriots, they began to support Mexicans to return to La Madre Patria. Yeah, you heard me right. They supported repatriation. But hear me out. The Mexican government didn't do it to support the United States, but they did as an effort to improve their own infrastructure and to modernize Mexico. You see, the Mexican government thought that if Mexicans that had been working for years and even decades in the U.S., they returned to Mexico, they would bring with them their higher quality goods as well as new farming technology. So the government of Mexico began to work with the consulates in the U.S. to offer assistance to Mexicans wanting to repatriate, and they began to send out repatriation announcements. They offered free transportation on buses, boats, trains, and even airplanes, and allowed repatriates to bring their belongings without worrying about fees or taxes. They were even offered free land in underpopulated areas of Mexico. But even though the incentives the Mexican government offered didn't turn out as planned, Mexico welcomed the estimated 1 million repatriates they received. Because Mexico's resources were depleted quickly, Mexican repatriates suffered greatly in trying to survive in Mexico, where the situation was often the same as or worse than in the United States. This mass deportation of Mexicans did not improve the hard times of the Great Depression. The history of Mexican repatriation is often silenced as an important part of the Great Depression and U.S. history. Those who do not bother to learn their country's history are doomed to repeat it. But who would be dumb enough to not know their country's history?